There's a moment when love turns into memory, not because we want it to, but because it has to. Amy had been waiting, quietly holding on to the pieces of Ty's presence for years. But on this day, something shifted, something broke. And in that quiet breaking, a truth finally came to light. Ty wasn't coming back, and Amy knew she had to let go. It started like any other morning on the ranch. The sun had just peeked over the hills, and the air was fresh with dew. Amy walked into the house after feeding the horses, her boots muddy, her face quiet. As she stepped into the living room, her eyes landed on an old wooden box that had been sitting untouched for years. She almost walked past it, like she always did, afraid of what she'd find inside. But something stopped her this time. Her hand reached out, slowly lifting the lid. Inside was a stack of letters, dusty and faded. Her breath caught when she saw Ty's handwriting on the top one. The envelope was still sealed. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. The ink had slightly bled, but the words were clear. Amy, if you're reading this, it means I'm not beside you anymore. But please, don't stop living for me. Promise me you'll keep writing, keep loving, and keep your heart open. Don't let the darkness in. You're stronger than you think. Amy's eyes filled with tears. She couldn't breathe. It felt like Ty had spoken from beyond, not with softness, but with certainty. She clutched the letter against her chest and collapsed onto the couch. The ache that had been hiding beneath her strength came flooding out. Memories raced through her mind. Ty helping her train wild horses. Ty laughing as Lindy took her first steps. Ty placing his hand on her back in the barn, steady and warm. And then, the hospital, the silence, the cold finality. She had never truly allowed herself to say goodbye. Just then, Lou walked in holding 2 mugs of tea. She froze when she saw Amy curled up on the couch, sobbing with Ty's letter in hand. She didn't speak right away. She simply placed the mugs down and sat beside her. "I found this," Amy whispered, barely able to speak. Lou nodded, gently placing her arm around her sister. "I've been pretending," Amy continued, voice shaking. "I kept thinking, maybe he'd walk through that door again, that this was just some long, strange dream." Lou didn't say anything for a moment. She just held her tighter. "Amy," she finally said, softly but firmly, "you're not alone in this. We all miss him. Every day. But you've been carrying something heavier than any of us. You've been holding on so tight, you've forgotten how to live." Those words sat heavily in the room. Amy looked down at the letter again. "I don't know how to let go," she admitted. "You don't have to forget him," Lou said, "but maybe it's time to stop waiting for something that isn't coming back." The pain in Amy's eyes was deep, but behind it, something began to flicker, a spark of understanding. She had always believed in healing through horses, through connection, through love, but she had never turned that same belief toward herself. Later that evening, she sat alone in Ty's old clinic. The space was still filled with traces of him. His medical bag still hung on the wall, his jacket draped over the chair. Everything frozen, like he'd just stepped out for a moment. But now, Amy saw it differently. It wasn't a room waiting for someone to return. It was a memory, gently preserved. She looked around and whispered to herself, "I've kept this space for you, Ty, but maybe it's time I make space for me again." The moment wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was simple, and that made it real. Amy stood up, took one last look at the clinic, and turned off the lights. For the first time in a long time, she didn't cry. She just walked out into the night, the wind brushing through her hair, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was chasing a ghost. She felt like she was finally walking towards something new. The next morning felt different. Not lighter, not easier, just different, like something deep inside Amy had turned a quiet corner. She walked down to the barn before sunrise, carrying Ty's letter folded in her pocket. The horses stirred softly as she entered, and the scent of hay and leather filled the space, familiar, grounding. But today, the barn didn't feel like a place haunted by the past. It felt like a place that had been waiting patiently for her to return fully. As Amy brushed Spartan, her hands moved slowly, almost thoughtfully. This horse had been with her through it all, her pain, her joy, her healing. Spartan had carried the weight of her silence without question. Now, as his eyes met hers, something in Amy shifted again. She whispered, "I'm still here, boy, and so are you." Then her gaze fell on the corner of the barn where Ty's old tack hung, untouched since the day he passed. His saddle, his rope, his gloves, all still there, like a frozen moment in time. For years, she couldn't bring herself to go near that space. It felt sacred, untouchable. But now, her feet slowly moved in that direction. She reached out and gently touched the saddle. The leather was cold, dusty, real. She closed her eyes and let her fingers rest there. And just like that, a flood of images poured into her mind. Ty saddling up early in the morning, his laughter echoing through the barn, the way he'd always say, "One more ride, just you and me." Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they weren't just from pain. They were from memory, from love, from something peaceful. Behind her, a small voice broke the silence. "Mama?" Amy turned to see Lindy standing at the barn door, holding a sketchbook in her tiny hands. "I drew something," she said shyly, "for Daddy." Amy knelt down as Lindy walked over and opened the book. Inside was a child's drawing, a picture of the family. Amy, Lindy, Grandpa Jack, and Ty smiling with a big heart over his chest. Amy tried to speak, but her voice cracked. Lindy looked up at her and asked, "Do you think Daddy can see it?" Amy paused, swallowing the lump in her throat. Then she nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. I think he sees everything." That simple moment hit harder than anything else. It reminded Amy that Ty wasn't gone from their hearts. He wasn't just a memory fading into the past. He was part of their story, part of who they were becoming. Later that day, Amy sat on the porch steps beside Jack. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the ranch. For a while, they just sat in silence, watching the land breathe. "I saw you in the barn today," Jack finally said, his voice calm and steady. Amy nodded. It felt right. Jack took a breath. Ty was a good man, but he wouldn't want your whole life to stop with his. Amy looked down at her hands. "I know. I think I've just been scared. That if I let go, I'll forget him." "You won't," Jack said softly, "because love like that doesn't disappear. It just changes." Amy looked out at the horizon. The wind moved through the grass like waves on water. In that quiet moment, everything felt connected. The past, the present, and something just beginning to bloom inside her. She whispered, "Maybe it's time." Jack gave a small nod. "Yeah, maybe it is." That night, Amy stood on the front porch alone. The stars were out, the air was cool, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was waiting. She felt like she was ready to carry Ty's memory with her, not like a weight, but like a light, a soft, guiding light, leading her toward something she hadn't felt in years. The morning came without warning. No dream, no sign, just a strange stillness in the air, like the world was holding its breath. Amy woke before the sun. She didn't say a word to anyone. She didn't even brush her hair. She simply dressed in a soft flannel shirt, the one Ty always said brought out her eyes, and walked out the door with a single folded letter in her hand. There was no hesitation in her steps. For once, she wasn't being pulled by pain or pushed by grief. This time, she was following something quiet inside her, something that whispered, "It's time." She walked past the barn, past the paddock, across the frost-covered field, until she reached the place she had avoided for so long. Ty's grave. The stone stood firm under the lone tree. The ground around it had been worn by time, by wind, by footsteps that never lingered long. Amy stood there for a while, just breathing, letter pressed tightly in her hand. "I didn't think I could do this," she finally said, her voice low but steady. "I thought if I said goodbye, it would mean forgetting, but I know better now." She knelt down slowly, placed the letter at the base of the stone, and unfolded it once more. This time, she read it aloud. "Ty," she began, her voice catching for just a second, "I spent years talking to you in my head, waiting for you to walk through the door. I held on so tightly to every part of you I could find, your shirts, your voice in videos, the smell of your jacket in the closet. But somewhere along the way, I stopped living. I forgot how to laugh the way I used to. I forgot how to let the wind in again." A gust moved through the tree above her. Leaves rustled quietly, like a soft answer. "I'll always love you. That part will never change. But today, I'm letting you go. Not because I want to, but because I have to. You're not here anymore, and I can't keep living in that silence. I want Lindy to see me smile again. I want to ride without feeling guilty. I want to believe that love can grow again, not in place of you, but beside you." Amy placed the letter gently on the stone, anchoring it with a small rock so it wouldn't blow away. She didn't cry like she thought she would. Instead, she closed her eyes and remembered the sound of Ty's voice calling her name. She remembered their first ride together, the way his hand fit perfectly in hers, the time he told her, "No matter what happens, I'll always be proud of you." She stood, brushed the dirt from her jeans, and looked out over the land. The sun was finally rising, not dramatic, just soft and warm, the kind of light Ty used to say was good riding weather. "I love you," she whispered one last time, "and now I'm going home." As she turned to walk away, the wind picked up behind her. Not cold, not harsh, just a quiet wind at her back, as if the world itself was pushing her forward. And maybe, just maybe, that wind carried a piece of Ty with it. A few feet away, Jack stood silently near the fence line. He hadn't followed her. He hadn't interrupted. He simply came to be there when she was ready. Amy didn't speak. She just looked at him and nodded. Jack understood. Back at the ranch, Amy walked into the barn with new eyes. The shadows didn't scare her anymore. She took Ty's saddle off the hook and cleaned it with care, whispering to herself, "You'll always have a place here, but I need to make space for something new." Later, she rode Spartan through the open fields, the wind in her face, the sky wide and blue, and this time she didn't look behind her once. Because for the first time in years, Amy Fleming wasn't chasing the past. She was riding straight into her future. The ranch felt different now, not because anything had changed on the outside. The barn still creaked the same, the horses still neighed in the early morning, and the gravel path still crunched under boots like it always had. But something inside Amy had shifted, and that quiet shift began to touch everything around her. It started small. She took down Ty's old coat from the hook by the door, the one she never let anyone move, and folded it with care, not to hide it away, but to preserve it with love. She placed it inside a cedar chest, along with the letter she had written, the photo Lindy drew, and Ty's favorite riding gloves. It wasn't a goodbye, it was a thank you. Each item she packed felt like another step forward, not away from Ty, but toward herself. Later that week, Amy walked into the barn with a notebook in her hand, pages filled with sketches and training notes. Her first project in years. A new horse, fresh from the auction, stood in the far stall, nervous, wild-eyed, a lot like Spartan had once been, a lot like Amy had become. She moved slowly, speaking gently. The horse backed away at first, unsure, but Amy didn't push. She simply stood there, letting it come to her on its own, and when their eyes finally met, really met, she smiled. "I know what it's like to be scared," she said softly, "but I also know what it's like to start over." From that moment on, something beautiful began to grow. Amy wasn't just training horses again. She was healing through them, the way she used to, with patience, with love, with a deep understanding that healing isn't about forgetting, it's about remembering in a way that lets you breathe again. Katie noticed the change first. "You're singing again," she told Amy one morning. Amy laughed, caught off guard. "Was I?" "Yeah," Katie said, while brushing the horses. Amy paused for a moment, surprised by her own smile. It felt natural, not forced, not performed, just real. Later that day, she found herself watching Lindy as she ran through the fields, barefoot and free. The little girl turned back and shouted, "Come on, Mama!" Amy didn't hesitate. She kicked off her boots and ran, laughing, chasing Lindy through the tall grass, the sun warming their skin, their laughter echoing across the land. It was the first time in years Amy had felt that kind of lightness. That night, sitting on the porch with Lou and Jack, Amy looked up at the stars, the same stars she once whispered to, begging for a sign. But tonight, she didn't need a sign. She had everything she needed right here. She turned to Lou. "Do you think it's okay if I feel happy?" Lou didn't speak right away. She just reached over, squeezed Amy's hand, and smiled. "It's more than okay. It's time." As the weeks passed, Amy continued to build a life with quiet strength. Not perfect, not pain-free, but full of moments that mattered. Small victories, slow mornings, long rides. She created a new training program at the ranch, this time focused on helping horses that had been abandoned, mistreated, or too broken for anyone else. And in each horse she helped, she found pieces of herself coming back. One day, she stood beside Spartan and looked out over the open fields. The wind picked up, warm and steady. She closed her eyes and whispered, "I'm okay now." Not because the pain was gone, but because she had finally made peace with it. She had accepted that Ty wasn't coming back. But his love never left. Some losses never fully heal, but life isn't about replacing what's gone. It's about honoring it by moving forward with love, courage, and hope. Amy's story isn't over. In fact, it's just beginning. Seasons changed, and with them, so did Amy. Autumn slowly rolled across Hudson. The leaves turned to fire red and deep gold, carpeting the trails Amy had once walked in silence. But this fall was different. This fall wasn't about holding on. It was about letting the earth take what it must and learning to trust what grows in its place. At the ranch, Amy had settled into a new rhythm. Early mornings were now filled with training sessions, laughter from the children, and warm coffee shared on the porch instead of long, lonely silences. The walls of the house that once echoed with the ache of absence were now filled with something else, life. One afternoon, Amy stood watching as Lindy helped brush one of the new horses, a gentle mare they'd rescued together. The little girl's hands were small but confident. Her face was full of light. It was like looking into the past and future all at once. Amy walked over, knelt beside her, and said, "You're getting good at that." Lindy beamed. "I'm going to be like you one day." Amy paused, her heart swelling. "You already are," she said softly. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and cast golden light over the paddocks, Amy sat on the porch steps holding a photo album. It wasn't dusty like before. She looked through the pictures. Ty holding Lindy for the first time, the two of them riding side by side, that quiet look of love that never needed words. She smiled, not with tears, but with warmth. Because now, these weren't just reminders of what was lost. They were proof of what had been and what would always remain. That night, Amy gathered with the family around a fire pit. Jack told one of his old stories. Lou teased Tim. Katie was roasting marshmallows. It wasn't a perfect family. It wasn't the same without Ty. But it was a family that had grown stronger through grief. A family that had chosen healing. Then, Lou pulled out a small gift. A necklace with a horse pendant. Simple, silver, delicate.